There you
Okay.
go. There it is.
So in case you missed anything, we just elected officers. We could hear out there. Give us a little grace, we're just getting back in the swing of things, but it's nice to have these recordings here where we can have good minutes going forward. Well, next then, we have our approval of claims and related items. I wanted to start with the discussion of the claim that we tabled last year at the end of the year, the UDO claim. It's now labeled 2025-58 since it's now for consideration as the first claim of this year. It would have been the one 2024-58 that we tabled. Since then, I do have the contact information for the consultants that were involved with that engagement. There's a balance of $43,000 to be paid on that. We tabled that because there was some questions about how that engagement was finished and whether we were satisfied that we were at the point of paying that yet. Since then, I've had a chance to talk with people on the Planning Commission. Bill Purcell is here actually, so he might have a chance to comment on that, and different government officials. But there seems to be a consensus, what Bill suggested from the Planning Commission. He would like, they're working through this UDO and trying to make updates, maybe suggested corrections and things that they think would be a better fit for Owen County. And what they'd like to see is have that consultant available for questions along the way, but more importantly, at the tail end when they get everything ready. Bill's suggestion was to have them come back and help them codify all those changes in the appropriate language, I guess the jargon, so we'd end up with something that we're all satisfied with as a county that we can work with going forward. I didn't talk with the consultant yet. I thought it'd be good to talk amongst ourselves about how we'd like to approach that. If they were willing to come back, would we be willing maybe to pay a portion of the $43,000 as a sign of goodwill, maybe leave a part at the tail end? So I wanted to see what you all thought. I didn't want to move ahead of the commission. Wanted to give things a chance to rest, get our newly elected officials in. I had a chance to talk with Sam Hobbs, one of our new commissioners, about that, to get how he felt about that. I've talked more recently with Polly now that they've had a few meetings. Tony's becoming more familiar with the issue. Welcome aboard, Tony.
Thank you.
And so I want to make sure we're not moving ahead of the county. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about this, how we would like to handle that. I think it's a very good idea that Bill has to bring them back in and maybe work this thing into something that we're happy with, that we can move forward with. So with that, what are some of your thoughts around the table? If you've had a chance to think about the issue, that's where I'm at on the updates I've received.
Has there been conversations with her or this firm to come back and work with us? Has
Not
that happened?
yet.
Okay.
I wanted
so it's hard
to
to make any decisions until we hear that result.
I guess I wanted to be able to know how we might negotiate that, to say, well, we're willing to pay X as a sign of goodwill. Bill?
Whenever I talked to her, whenever we created the committee to go through this chapter by chapter, and I asked her, I said, if you could reference all the state statutes, which she referenced them, but they're IRC numbered, you've got to look them up. And I mean, there's,
So
if you could print those out, have those there, have what we have currently, and then we see what they propose. And she said, I've done my job, I'm not doing any more. And she said she wanted us to take that to the December or January meeting and pass it as it was. And it's not passable by any stretch, but I mean, total lack of cooperation. And she says, well, I've already done that. I've cited the codes. Well, she cited the codes as far as the Indiana code number, but not to say this is what this is and that is. And we're trying to get this thing so we can make a document that we can live with. And zero cooperation from her, from me to her. So I have had that conversation.
So there's a bit of a consensus from different people I've talked with on Polly and Sam. It's kind of like, well, the only leverage we seem to have is this final invoice if they were going to come back and do something. But I wanted to know, what are we willing to do? If they were to say, yeah, we're willing to do that, would we be willing to pay maybe 2/3 of this final claim, or are we going to hold the whole claim? How do we feel about that part? Because right now half has been paid, about $86,000 engagement, and this is $43,000. So I didn't want to get ahead of the commission. If I'm going to be in the position to negotiate, or do we want our attorney to negotiate, how do we want to move forward with that? I know we certainly don't want litigation, but I think it's a reasonable request for them to come back on the tail end and make this something that we're happy with as a county. If the planning commission is willing to do the work to go through all these details so that everyone feels like we have something we can work with going forward. So I just want to be reasonable.
I think the planning commission's the one that has to put that work in and make this thing happen before we can move forward. I mean, that ball's in their court with this UDO, because that's where it originated from. That's just my opinion.
I tend to agree, but if they were willing to come back and say, yes, we'll help with that, are we willing to pay a portion of this claim as a sign of goodwill?
My thing is, I mean, as Bill stated, I mean, she said that we're done, you know, we're not doing anymore, and I don't think she's fulfilled her obligation. So I'm not in favor of, if she said I will come back and help, you know, help with this, then I would be in favor of paying a portion, but not now, not if she's not, if they refuse to come back at all.
Marcy, have you spoken to her at all or been involved in any of this?
I have.
Okay.
And so I agree with Polly. I think it's a matter of looking at that obligation, that contract that originally was put there. I mean, that's the contract. So, I mean, looking at that and seeing what all she said she was going to provide for the county, did she fulfill her commitment or did she not? I mean, that's kind of point blank. Either she did or she didn't. If she did, then I think we do have to consider, so to avoid any litigation, what needs to be paid if she fulfilled that contract. If she didn't fulfill the contract, then obviously that gives you room to negotiate. I did speak with Deborah and communicated to her that, you know, just updated her on the fact that there's a new steering committee, that they're moving through it, that Bill Purcell was, you know, leading individuals through that, and that it would, you know, would it be helpful to the steering committee to see those state statutes removed from the extra recommendations, and would she be available to do that? So if I'm correct, in the conversation that I had with her, if you go back to when we did the comprehensive plan, we had KK, she was on that consulting firm. She actually went through and did that already, okay? She already has those divided. So in the comprehensive plan, we have those original state statutes already divided, and I have that document, Board of Economic Development. I'm sure that's within the comprehensive plan as well, so we could pull that up and bring that to them. Short story short, Deborah said that she would be willing to come back to help us through this next process, but that would need to have some conversations.
Okay. That's good news.
Yeah.
So are we willing, assuming that's true and she's willing to come back, do we want to pay a portion of this, approve a portion of that, or wait till the next meeting?
Tell me
to
what
do that?
obligation do we have if we pay a
I would be
portion
more
of this?
comfortable with Tony looking at the contract.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the contract, and I also haven't seen the work product that she's produced thus far, so it's hard for me to get an opinion on the fly.
Okay.
Having said that, I mean, if you aren't satisfied with the product you've received, and you don't believe she's satisfied her obligations, then I don't think you're obligated to make an additional payment at this point. I mean, that's
Okay.
just my initial thought, but again, I need to dig more into it to give you a final opinion about that.
My opinion of it is keep our leverage, not pay a cent until it's done.
And I think we need to get some type of written obligation from her based on what Marcy just said, that she's willing to come back and finalize this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
At some point, obviously not now, at some point I'd like to see the work product she's given you, just so I can see
I can
myself
send
where
that
she's
to you,
in.
yeah.
So as far as communications, would you prefer to have a chance to get up to speed on things before I open the conversation?
I
or-
would,
Okay.
because it'd be helpful to me before I talk to her again,
Okay,
do a whole lot to see where we're at.
Okay.
myself.
well, perhaps at this point, we just need to table this then until further action, and we'll just keep in communication, Tony. And, is it okay if Tony gives me the go-ahead between now and our next meeting? If he says it's okay to start those communications, I can take the lead on that?
I'll make a motion to approve that request.
I'll second.
Okay. That way I'm not holding it up for our next meeting.
That's a good idea.
Okay. Very good.
There's a,
That's the motion. We have a second. How do we all feel about that motion?
Aye.
All in favor, say aye.
I,
All opposed, same sign. Very good. We'll just stay in communication on that, Tony. and
Sure.
I'm glad you were here to give us some insight, Marcy.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
that. I just didn't want to get ahead of things and start a conversation before we were all on the same page. So, very good. So that's tabled for now. I guess that's included in that motion. Next, we have more normal claims. We have our Cook Bond claim that's paid twice a year. The payment that's due is $84,250. People's State Bank helps us administer those. As part of that arrangement, they charge us $300 a year with all the bookkeeping services they provide. So that's the next claim after that, to pay half of that fee of $175. I'm not aware of any other claims before us at this time. Occasionally, we'll see something from the paper, but I don't know how that, we haven't been billed a long time on that, so I guess we've been blessed in that respect. But if we could, if you would look at these, does anyone have any questions about those two claims with the Cook Bond and the fee from People's State Bank? If we could have a motion to have those paid in February on the next cycle?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
That's it. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And that'll get those taken care of. I'll sign those
So, okay,
for
so
you.
I was gonna ask, who's actually doing the claims? If we have a treasurer, is the treasurer just providing financial reports, or are they gonna be the claims person also? Are you gonna remain the claims person?
I'll continue to sign claims.
Okay.
And then the vice president will sign in the case that I'm absent. That's been the normal procedure. Tony, if you find a correction in that down the line, let us know, but that's traditionally been our procedure to do that.
Yeah, we keep doing it that way.
And then I'll elaborate on that, even though Holly is the secretary treasurer, I've always volunteered to keep my part of the books between us and the auditor's office. And you're already keeping a set of books, but then I help with the reports that we do. I'm just happy to do that, so. Didn't want you to think you got elected into something, Polly.
I'm happy for you to
I
do
think
that,
your hands
too.
are full being president of the council. Something else we do when we have these ongoing claims that are predictable, like we know there's gonna be another Cook Bond payment, we'll know we'll pay the second half of the fee, we'll occasionally pay for media notification fees. We have a motion in place, usually at the beginning of the year, that gives me the authority to approve those claims, sign those claims, we'll look at them in our next meeting, but that keeps us from being late if for some reason we couldn't have a meeting at the right time. So generally, the first meeting of the year, we set that motion in place for the year. That allows me to have the authority to do that. But it's only for those stated claims that we are aware of or that are repetitive. And that's worked pretty well for us. That way, we're not in a bind to make sure Cook is paid on their bond. People receives their fee, and we're happy to pay those media notification fees that tend to be fairly minor. I wouldn't do anything else as far as any other claims, just to be clear on that. Are we okay with having a motion like that again for this year?
Do you want to put that motion on the floor?
Yeah, so it's on the floor.
I'll make that motion for the reoccurring claims.
Okay. Any other discussion about that? Can we have a second?
Second it?
All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. That just helps us conduct our business and make sure we're timely on these obligations that we know about. Next, we have our financial reporting, nothing too fancy. You have a summary of the 3 different bank accounts that we have in front of you. I put that together yesterday. It shows the ending balance at the end of December. That's the most recent bank statement we've received, and the year-to-date interest those accounts have made. That should be the next page after those claims. I'll find anyone to share with me.
I had them all laid out.
That's fine. And then behind that is a copy of the bank statements from November through December. Last meeting, we covered everything through October, so we're just picking up where we left off. In summary, the 2371 account had a balance of $303,627.76. Interest year to date of $11,178.58. The 2380 account has a balance of $734,478.17. Year-to-date interest of $25,662.57. And the 2398 account has a whopping balance of $29.61. Total of all those, we have $1,038,135.54 at the end of the year. Year-to-date interest of $36,841.15. As you look at the bank statements, I think the only activity you're going to see is mainly interest. And I think the deposit of our property taxes from November, which was about $7,000 and change, you'll see in one of those accounts. Fortunately, on these bank statements, the 2371, you'll see 2 separate statements because we get a separate statement every month. But for the other 2 accounts, the December statement was sufficient because it gives you activity all the way back to 2024, November before. So you don't have to have multiple statements on that one. You can see all the activity on those 2 accounts. But not a lot of activity to talk about, but for transparency's sake, we want to make sure we're all aware of what's going on in those accounts. The next activity we'll see will be these claims we've approved that'll be paid in February. I don't want to spend any more time on that than I need to, but I also want to make sure I cover these details for us as a group. And any questions or comments on the financial reporting? If not, if you're okay with that, if you just want to approve the financial reporting as presented with a motion.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Well, thank you. Old business. I don't know if we have any updates. One of the next things on our list for the future is the potential for sewer expansion over to the McCormick's Creek Elementary. The first step in that, we wanted to open communications with the potential easement area landowners. We didn't want to get ahead of them. And I don't know, I think that's probably going to be thrown in your lap, Tony. Dana was working on that, Dana Kerr, our attorney from last year.
Sure.
And
I also have those contacts, Lisa Baker from, so I've got that information as
Okay.
well.
Great.
so I think that's more of an ongoing thing. I don't think anything's happened since the end of the year. But that would be our next step, is we'd like to have some communications with these landowners about having an easement in the area that we thought that would be, make sure they're on board with taking sewer to that area. Seems like that's the most logical step on sewer expansion as far as something that's doable, something we can work with the school on. I know the school would like to have that done over there. They have plans for the future. Just to have sewer over to that area would be a nice step, and to open up that corridor for future development. But you always want to start with the landowners, and once we get that going, we can look at the next steps, which I think the next logical step would be a cost estimate update, getting the school involved, and off we go, looking at the funds we have available and how we're going to pay for the rest. So we've got a long way to go on that, but that's what I see as the low-hanging fruit on something we could look at seriously in the near future.
In a brief conversation, Craig, I think that there's some interest from the Baker family to possibly do this or look at it,
Okay, good.
so.
You just want to make sure they're on board. You don't want to start something like this and they find out later and go, what? Why didn't you ask us? So we're just trying to go the proper channels on that. So that's more of an FYI. We'll continue to look at that issue. Do we have any updates to talk about on where we left off in December on the potential jail site property at the Rogers Quarry and the related property the county owns south?
Can I jump back real quick and
You
ask
sure
Chris a
can.
question, since he's developing out there? Originally, we talked about hooking onto your sewer at the back part of your property to go across there. Is that still a viable option, or, I've heard that you had to put pump stations by each house out there because the sewer lines weren't big enough, or, just, can you fill me in a little bit?
We do a 4-inch main that's with grinder pumps, so no, it's not viable.
It's not viable to hook on, okay, so we would have to come from the main line at 43 and run across, okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's a good
Yeah.
detail.
It would just save us some
Right.
Yeah.
feet, yards, quarter of a mile, whatever it is, across the back of your property.
And we understand that you had to do what you had to do on your
Right.
development, so there's no criticism there.
No, not at all, I just
So-
update. Yeah.
Just knowing what we have. But, any updates on the potential jail site or anything we need to be aware of that's happened since December? I don't think we were planning to do anything major today. It was more of a matter of getting our feedback on the ground. What updates do we have? We have a new attorney on board. So this is kind of just open for any updates we should be aware of, the things that are being considered or looked at before we go to the next steps.
One thing I'd add, I guess,
Turn your mic off so he can turn his on. We're only allowed 4 now.
under the current Phase 1 report that you got from your environmental consultant, that report will expire 180 days from August 10th. That means the report will expire as of February 16th. If the property is not closed on by the county by then, the report, as I said, would expire. Moving forward with an expired report could expose the county to additional environmental liability that would not be present if an unexpired report were in the county's hands at the time of closing. In addition, I have reviewed your engagement letter with your environmental consultant, and in speaking with the environmental lawyers at my firm, it would be my suggestion that, given the time limitations and given some issues with the engagement letter from, again, your existing consultant, that you consider doing a second Phase 1 analysis of the property. Now, I know that would add a little bit to the cost. I think your Phase 1 that you currently have cost about $2,300. So you'd be looking at a similar cost again. But when you consider the cost of this project and the potential liability exposure to the county and its potential risk, it's my view that it would be worth having a second look.
That extends our timeline to get things done appropriately.
Correct. That will give you an additional 180-day period to close on the property and take whatever additional steps are necessary. Because again, right now, you are up against a February 16th deadline to close.
So can we use that same firm, Tony, or do we have to get another firm, or does that make a difference?
I would suggest you look at some other firms.
Okay.
Again, that was the recommendation of one of my environmental lawyers.
Looking for some discussion, what's all of your reaction to that? I think it sounds prudent to me. Thank you.
So Craig, do we put that ball in your court to look out, reach out to additional firms to do that analysis?
Would that be the
President of the board, or
appropriate, or what's the protocol?
Sure. Perhaps that's something we could talk about offline.
Okay.
We can talk about potential options and potential companies that could do that work.
And then would that be something we approve at our next meeting?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or are we comfortable enough if we find a suitable firm in the timeline that we make sure that gets done by the time of February 16th? I don't know when our next meeting's going to be. Do we want to have approval on that price range? Assuming we have the appropriate firm, if you disapprove me to work with Tony on that, are we required to have 3 bids on a project like that, or
I don't believe you are.
it's pretty de minimis?
Yeah, given the amount involved, I don't think you need the 3 bids.
Beth?
I have a suggestion. We have, don't want to put you on the spot, John, but that's what he works with. He may be able to suggest some firms.
Okay. Well,
He's worked with all of them probably, you know.
I'd be fine with John being part of the conversation with Tony and I, if you guys want to delegate that to me and just make sure we get it done, and just have your approval for a price range of 2,300 to 3,000, is that?
Sure. Around that range. Sure.
Sound reasonable?
I think
And
that's
maybe have a
fair.
motion like that in place, and we'll just take care of it.
I'll make that motion. Craig's allowed to go up to 3,000 for an additional environmental study.
Sounds
Good motion.
I'll second that.
very good. And then I'll work with Tony and John Reeves on that, and we'll just get that taken care of so we can stay compliant and not be under an unnecessary deadline to get things done appropriately. We've taken time to get here this so far, and I'm not going to rush for February 16th deadline. Everyone in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you, Tony, for bringing that to our attention.
Sure.
Appreciate that. Is there anything else to talk about in respect to that property or the county property involved?
I have a couple of things, if I may.
Okay.
Since getting involved in this, something about that concrete plant just really bothers me. I don't know why the county won't own the concrete plant. And it's also my understanding too, of course, that's an IMI plant. And that from a conversation yesterday with the operator of the quarry when it closed, IMI leased ground from them to keep that plant there. And I can't imagine them just walking away from a plant, a facility like that. I mean, the environmental report expresses several concerns about that plant. An above ground, an unauthorized above ground 10,000 gallon storage tank, several other storage tanks with chemicals that were used in the concrete processing, lots of tires, stuff like that. Now, has anybody talked to IMI?
Brett Franklin told me, the landowner, that he owns that plant. That come from him. Now, I can't confirm that. He's the one that owns the property, but he said that that was part of the deal. They had so many days for that plant to be removed, and if not, then he was the owner. And Tony will have to look into that with Mr. Franklin.
Are we talking about the back portion of that piece of property, or are we talking about the section that,
Where that plant sets up back
Yeah,
there,
on the
which is
front
part
end.
of this 9.5 acres, yeah.
yeah, because my understanding is that Rogers Group still owns my understanding is that Rogers Group still owns the quarry itself,
The
but,
back part,
yes.
Way
So,
back there, yeah.
yeah,
This is up front where that,
Correct, where the scales and everything are.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. But again, John, that's just what Brett just told me, and I have nothing to confirm that or deny that.
Well, and I was just wondering, according to the environmental report, there are several concerns, possible spilled fuel out of that 10,000 gallon tank. There's no confinement around it or anything like that. Now, if the county goes ahead and buys that, and then IBM gets in the middle of it, who's gonna put the cost? Is that gonna be leaked from the $25 million jail budget? I'm sure it would.
Sure it would.
And, my quick fix would be, and this is just between me and myself, is exclude that little part right there. Brett Franklin, keep it.
And it doesn't amount to a whole lot anyway.
No. Or either you can go in there and clean it up prior to the closing, or make some type of arrangements, or let him keep it. That way it doesn't become a part of the next environmental report.
So to be clear, you're talking about this little area on the back part of that property by the tree
Very far
line.
back tip.
By the tree line.
You see that IMI portable
Yeah.
concrete plant. I don't know about a fuel tank out there. I know there's a cement tank out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, instead of being 9.57, it could be 9. And take that half out and leave it with Brett's other property.
We could make sure the environmental study addressed that, couldn't we?
The environmental study that was previously done, the one that expires in February, does reference that plant. And it talks about how the environmental consultant reached out to IMI to get some information and didn't receive a response.
And
And
did
so,
they get that response?
no,
No.
they did not.
And probably because maybe they don't own it anymore. Again, I don't know that for sure.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure we address that, and if the easy solution is just to exclude that part of the property, as long as the environmental study doesn't raise concerns about it being adjacent. Thank you for raising that concern. We appreciate that.
Well, the other main concern that the environmental report that stands out to me is the possibility of radon. And there's nothing you can do about the radon. It's gonna be there no matter what. But has there been any consideration in the construction of this new building to be able to mitigate that?
Mhm. Well, we can definitely pass that along to our engineers.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say our engineers, the engineers. The county they're talking to. Well, thank you, John.
Well,
Did you have anything else? Okay.
those are the two major things.
Well, we appreciate that. So let's have that, let's make note of those things. I'd like to make sure, would you like me to convey that to the engineers? Did you want to convey that to the
I
engineers?
can call Greg if that's what you guys want me to do.
If you could do that, that'd be great.
Okay.
Can I ask a question on the new study? Is there anything time-wise that you guys need to be doing to kind of get closer? I would hate to be another fee for a 180-day report and then have to do another one because we haven't kind of met or got to where, I don't know what all is out there on the different levels.
Probably we need to talk to Thornburg and Dustin on that, since he's the one that's been behind this project. Tony can communicate with him.
Sure.
They're the ones that had the timeline and the way it was all to be set up.
Okay.
I know that there was 30 days waiting after our last meeting for some reason. I don't even remember why that was. The property still needs surveyed at some point, once we make sure we've got a clear environmental issue taken care of. I don't know if we should have Tony reach out to Mr. Franklin and have a discussion and show proof that who owns that IMI portable plant. It's not a full-blown concrete plant, it's a portable plant. So I think that information needs to be looked into as well.
Is there any other discussion or items to talk about on this issue at this point?
Kind of bring up one more point, as a group here, since we've dealt with this for a year, are we still all in favor of this is the best location that we've came up with. I still, I mean, we agree that is, I want to make sure that we're all still on the same page here if we deal with these issues.
I believe we are.
Okay.
It's just a matter of making sure we're covering everything and ready to move forward in the right way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree, we don't want to do anything that's going to get us in trouble down the road.
I think
So-
we've done our due diligence as far as this committee. I think we've done our due diligence as far as this committee is concerned, to ensure that, you know, this location is suitable for this new jail site. Overall, I think most of the concerns that I originally had either amounted to nothing or were so minor that it was just like, well, you're gonna run into that anywhere else, so.
If I may, I forgot about one other thing. In talking with this closing manager, he related to me, he said, where's the jail exactly gonna go? I said, well, it's gonna go over on that front 9 acres. And he said, as question, had there been core drilling done? And I said, I don't know. And he said, better make sure they got their ducks in a row on the core drilling, because there was quite a considerable part of that filled. He said one of the last things he did as manager there was Rogers had him spend 2 solid weeks on a dozer filling in a quarry hole on that 9 acres.
Yeah, there was core drilling,
Yeah.
what, 12 or some different.
Yeah, the sample core dealings that they took looked really
And
good.
do you have that information, Tony, the core drilling samples? You do not?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if I have it or not. I have the environmental report. That's what I've got.
There has been that Patriot out of Terre Haute, I think, is the one that come over and did that.
Yeah,
And we have the depths and all that.
yeah.
Where's the documentation at, so we can keep it?
Craig should.
I know I've got a copy,
Okay.
so I know it's in
We can get a
PDF form
copy
out
of that
there.
for our books.
That was presented in that meeting at
Yeah.
the school too.
Yeah, and you probably have copies in a pile from the last meeting too, but yeah, I can make sure you get the PDF copies. Well, that's one of the purposes of this meeting, get our feet back under the ground, start continuing forward with the issues, allowing our new county attorney to get up to speed, and then getting ready for the next steps, but also making sure, as John shared, what other things do we need to consider as we get to, I think we're in the red zone on this. Make sure we've considered what we need to consider, so we make sure we're doing this appropriately. So, thank you all for your input on that, we sure do appreciate it. If there's not any more to discuss on that, we'll move on to our new business. Marcy and Robert Reynolds are here. If you want to introduce yourself and the firm you're with.
Sure.
We're going to talk about, they want to educate us a little bit about residential TIF housing.
Yeah, so like you said, Craig, it all starts with the landowner. So today we also have with us Chris Ball and John Livingston, who own the property out there on 43.
Can you,
Yes.
Come on up, turn on the mic.
There we go.
We're all recorded on
No worries.
YouTube, so.
So after discussions at the end of last year with Chris and John about their interest in continuing with the residential TIF, and I know that's something that the Redevelopment Commission has talked about for some time, I've reached out to Greg Jones of SIDC, asked if he had a suggestion of an expert who could maybe answer some questions and give us some more information about a residential TIF. And so today with us we have Robert Reynolds. So I'm just going to turn it over to him. He most certainly can answer any questions you might have about this.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Robert Reynolds. I'm with LWG CPAs and Advisors. And I just came down, I was asked to come down here and talk to you guys about residential TIFs. I thought I could kind of do it a couple different ways. I can kind of just walk through kind of the process, what the funds can be used for, and kind of the general guidelines, and they can answer questions. Or we can get straight into questions. I'm not sure how much depth you guys were looking for today, or. Okay. So, the residential TIF, it is a relatively new instrument. It's only been around for a couple of years. It's been kind of changed as well since it came into play. I believe it was last year or 2 years ago where legislation was passed and did make it a little simpler to do. The process for adopting a TIF, or a residential TIF, or a housing TIF, they kind of have all those different names that people call it from, is actually very similar to a traditional TIF. Are you guys familiar with that process. So really the process currently in statute is very similar. The only real difference right now is that 30 days prior to adopting your declaratory resolution, you have to have a public hearing for the impacted neighborhoods. So really it's a public hearing before you start the process where the most of the people that come are going to be the impacted taxing units. That's really when the school has an opportunity to speak up. Sometimes you may get a township or some general concerners, general areas. In a situation like this where there's really one property owner, really the only neighborhood there is that single property owner. What there used to be prior to last year and until 6/30/2027, these items were taken off the table is you used to have to get a school sign off and you have to do this what's called a 1% test. And that was where it looked at new residential housing startups over the last 5 years versus what your current residential was, and it had to pass this 1% test. Well, those two items have been taken off the table until 6/30/2027. Current statute just says, as of right now, you don't have to do it, but after 6/30/2027, they will go back into place. So it's almost kind of a test period to see how it goes, how do people mistreat it. So there is a possibility that, or unless anything changes, it will go back into place, but right now you do not have to do that. So right now school sign off is not required. So once you do that public hearing, you really just get into the same process as a traditional TIF. That's when you're going to have your redevelopment commission will meet, you'll adopt your declaratory resolution. Instead of as part of that resolution, instead of having the economic development plan, you have what's called a housing plan, which is very similar to the ED plan. That's just going to state your plan, what you want to use any of these revenues for. It's going to go over what projects you'd like to do and kind of talk about that so the public has a document to look at. And so you're kind of stating what you like to do. In the declaratory resolution, you also define the area where you're going to have this residential TIF. Then you would adopt this resolution. Then you would have to take it to the county planning commission and the county council. They both would have to adopt and approve these commissions. Then you'd have to hold back here at the redevelopment commission a public hearing and adopt a confirmatory resolution. At that, and also 10 days prior to that public hearing, a tax impact statement does have to go out to all the impacted taxing units. So the school, the county, the township, everyone would have just have a document that shows the tax impact. Very similar to what you would have to do for a traditional TIF. So really that's the process. I say traditionally it's about 60 to 90 days. You can speed it up if you wanted to. There's nothing that says it has to be that long. It's really just that period from the public hearing to you can start declaratory resolution if you wanted to have special meetings and so forth. But if you wanted to do it kind of under general normal meetings, it's about a 60 to 90 day kind of time period. So that's creating the area. Once the area is created, the time period for the area, it is in place for the 20 years after the issuance of the first bonds. So you create the area, there's really no timetable on that until a debt is issued. Once you issue a debt, there's a 20-year time period that is put on to that area. The funds that you generate in this area, there's really 4 main things statute allows you to use it for. The first thing is the construction of infrastructure and local improvements related to housing. Very vague. It doesn't really give you specific items. But my general understanding is they just really want to keep these improvements to things related to housing. Utilities, roads, sidewalks, just public improvements, public infrastructure. You can get away, I've seen people do things such as parks, even though it may not be directly in the housing, as long as it's improving and helping the housing. You can also use it to acquire property or real property interest within the housing TIF for the purpose of rehabilitation. And the third thing is for site preparation, which kind of goes back to the first part of infrastructure. The other item you are allowed to do is you're allowed to issue bonds or debt in order to do those first 3 items. So if you wanted to, issue a bond to help pay for roads, help pay for infrastructure, you can do that. The most common thing that you see with the bonds is what's called a developer purchase bond. It works very similar. I don't know if you've ever done this with a traditional TIF. It works kind of very similar in the same manner. It's a paper type of bond where the developer is purchased the bond. It's a no money transaction. They receive the paper of the bond, and then they receive the cash flow from the debt payments that are due on the bond. And the debt payments are then sized based on the TIF that's going to come in. And the amount that's kind of done there is negotiated between the two parties, but that's kind of the most common incentive that you kind of see out there. That's really the basics. Any questions? Did I lose anybody? Or
With infrastructure, does that include sewer lines?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
So that is a consideration if you want to develop the area behind that,
Cross Baker Farms.
yeah, Cross Baker Farms, to connect the school. That could be leverage used to help incentivize the school to, maybe pay a portion of that as well.
No, that's a good thing. I guess a question I've got, sitting here for as long as I have, and we've had many discussions on TIFs. We've talked about, we have a commercial TIF, whether that be or not be, just be a TIF. We would have to dissolve that and move this to a residential TIF. Am I correct in saying that, Tony?
I don't know.
Okay.
The question is, can you have overlap? We've already got a commercial
Do we
TIF
have
in that whole
both?
area.
Yeah.
Can you have overlap of a residential over part of a commercial TIF, or do you have issues with that?
As an accountant, I would say, why not? I don't see any reason.
I'm right there with
I'm
you.
not aware of any statute that says you cannot. However, I would highly recommend, I know you mentioned Barnes, I don't know if you work with Barnes and Thornburg, I would check with them. Have them sign off on before you try doing something like that. I don't see any reason why you couldn't, because they're two different areas and they're two different, as long as those parcels are not in the TIF. So if they're in I don't think they could belong in two separate TIFs, because you can't collect on them twice, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So in that certain reason, no, but
Well, let's say that we solve that issue and you can do this thing. So you might set up a residential TIF in the current property development that we do have, 4 Oaks there, and say, well, we'd like to go all the way, we envision residential development all the way across where we'd like this sewer line. So the money that pays for that is appreciation in residential development, correct? So the timeline starts when? When you've set that first zone in place, or when you first have debt?
when you first have debt.
So until you have debt, the timeline doesn't start on tracking the appreciation of residential property, right?
Yeah.
Improvements, because that's what's gonna do that, is the improvements from residential property are gonna be the property tax dollars that you're funneling into this zone that'll pay for these potential improvements
Yes.
that we all decide on as a governmental entity, which would be sewer, for example. Would roadways be an example, if you wanted a public
Yeah.
roadway to go
Yeah.
across that? So you could use these
Absolutely.
residential dollars that you're, as these residential developments continue to grow, and you have appreciation in property tax dollars, you're basically saying, we have 20 years to use these dollars for these kind of projects, whether it be extending sewer to the school, a roadway to the school that would go along there, that would be to the benefit of anybody in that area, sidewalks, utilities, anything that we deem that we want the county to invest in, as opposed to the developers paying for. Because that's really what you're saying, is these are property tax dollars that will pay for some of these things that you're not going to force the developers to pay for, piece by piece, in their area. If I understand, that's how this,
No,
that's how this works.
you are absolutely correct.
Okay. So,
The thing to remember, it needs to be in or serving the area. So even if it's a roadway just outside that's serving into the area, people have used it for dollars like that as well. You could use it for that too.
because I would tend, from a county view, we would tend to look at things for the county's benefit, that, for the whole area that we're looking at. But it sounds like the big question is, we already have a commercial TIF, can we overlap? And does that just automatically change what was commercial to residential? And we don't have someone to answer
So-
that question today.
So
That's my biggest question.
I'm picturing a roadway here. So this roadway here, where you think is going to be residential, is currently TIF'd as a commercial TIF. Okay. Yeah, I think you'd probably have to dissolve that, because I don't know if you can TIF the same parcel twice.
Probably not.
But that,
Yeah, that's a concern.
Well, I remember this came up way back when, before we had a development there, the idea of putting a TIF there, and I remember the TIF had to be very specific to the area you want to say is going to be residential, because you can't have commercial and residential at the same time on a TIF. But the matter of how the zones worked, we never went that far, because
Yeah.
we just
So we don't know how far down 43 corridor that TIF was. Is there something?
I know it at least goes to where the housing development is, and maybe down a little further, but we'd have to review that.
yeah, and that's just an action you'd have to take to dissolve that portion of the TIF.
Yeah.
It's just a legal action, that process that you'd have to go through. And the good thing is that, so when you create a TIF, the base assessed value goes back to the 1/1 of the current year. We're in January, so you have all year to, if you need to dissolve a portion of that TIF and then create the residential TIF, to make both of those. You have plenty of time to get that done by 12/31.
We've got some property owners here, and I'll let Bill talk as well. How do you see a TIF like that working?
My
Are you?
question is, if we take this and I don't want Chris to spend any more money that he doesn't have to, but if we take these houses and put in a TIF, and for 20 years, they're gonna pay money into this thing, but if he develops that whole thing out there, we'll have to add on to McCormick Street School. We'll have to have more police, we'll have to have more, I mean, there's all these additional costs, but that money is going to develop more property, not to pay those bills. And, you know, I don't understand why we would, I mean, we're taxed to death enough as it is. And we're gonna take a whole new development and say, oh, none of that goes into the taxpayers' relief for schools, which is 71% of our tax dollars. But if we had to build onto that school, because all of a sudden we got all these houses, kids going to that school, that's a good thing. But if we're taking that money away, am I correct in saying that money will be taken away from the county and moved to economic development?
So the money, yes, the assessed value from
Increase the assessed value.
the increases in the assessed value from this real property will go to the redevelopment commission and will not be allowed to be collected by the greater county. There's a couple of things to speak to there. The first thing is, from the assessed value standpoint and the school's budget standpoint, Indiana does have max levies, so the school's levy would not be going up. The school would not be receiving additional tax dollars from this development. It would just allow the max levy stay level where it's at. AV goes up, so the tax rate would go down. So that is one benefit that you would not be obtaining. The other benefit there that you would be missing too is, and I don't know because I didn't have time to research this, is if there's a high circuit breaker impact, that's another place where you do lose a benefit, because that's where you would benefit from the tax rate falling down. You did bring up a good point though about the school or expanding of the school. That is a real point, and it's something redevelopment commissions do have to think about, is that growth in assessed value would have been able to use by the school to issue additional debt by taking that additional AV and holding their tax rate constant. It does take away that tool. I mean,
Aren't our school numbers declining every year? I thought they were going down.
They've held steady. So, from the school's perspective, Bill, you're correct. TIFs, residential TIFs, can be viewed, can be favorable to school corporations if a redevelopment commission does the work to ensure that that happens. I'm not an expert, but there is, I believe, an option for a pass-through that this redevelopment commission could decide to have a pass-through of that assessed value to the school corporation. But as the ex officio member of this redevelopment commission, I have no voting power to, or say over anything in the state. That's been a hotly debated issue of they removed school sign-off on a TIF district. And so a residential TIF, redevelopment commission could be very greedy in the way that they design that TIF, and could screw over the school corporation pretty easily. As far as that rise in assessed value not coming to us to build the school. So as far as numbers, Chris, if that development out there, if you're doing what you're doing, and that grows and that continues, then that school, McCormick's Creek Elementary in particular, would see a big influx of students. With that many more homes, I mean, we're going to see a lot more students attending that school, and would be faced with needing to look at improvements to facilities, which property tax, that's what pays for that. So,
Because there's a big difference in taxing a vacant lot.
yeah.
And taxing a house,
Yeah.
lot of house on it.
Yeah.
And that increase for 20 years is sitting there, and we can drool over it, but it's not going to pay the bills. And it's not the school. You've got to have more police, you've got to have
Yeah.
more fire,
Yeah.
you've got to have, you know.
All county services.
All
I mean,
county
all
services.
county services.
As a county council person, that's my concern, because we run on a tight budget as it is, and increasing our sheriff deputies and the increased cost to the traffic on our roads, we would not be able to offset that with anything, so that's my concern.
So, I mean, a residential TIF, if used responsibly, can address these issues. If used irresponsibly, and we just, this redevelopment commission just takes all that assessed value and says, it's our money, we're going to do what we want with it, there will be losers in that situation. And the schools often are at the mercy of the redevelopment commission that this commission plays nice and looks out for the school's interest as well, the county's interest as well, and all of the parties involved. That redevelopment sounds great, but if that redevelopment, we do all of that, and but then we have other taxing units that are then not able to provide the services, that's a problem. So with this subject coming up with the redevelopment commission, I mean, the school board will push and come here. Other members are less favorable of, if you want Mark Rogers to really get on a tear, bring up a residential TIF. He'll gladly give you his opinion. And so we will push this redevelopment commission to ensure that the school corporation, that there is a fair deal out of this, and lobby for that, that we are not losing in the if there is, and hopefully there is growth in that assessed value, and that we don't lose out on that.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing up these issues, because I think this commission has always tried to look for win-win situations. And I like hearing that there are things we could put in place if we decided to go that direction that would protect the school. In fact, I would want the school's input if we were to go that direction, on how we could set up those safeguards and work together to plan ahead. Because all we're trying to do is see what are the win-wins we can put in place, take advantage of things that are already occurring. We have a great development going already. You get sewer going across in an easement, you're opening up that whole corridor for more development, which means more families, more dollars in Owen County, not just property tax dollars, but income dollars and spending dollars that just leverage themselves. So if we can do these kind of things responsibly with the safeguards in place, not only for us that we're in power now, but for future people that will be in power, that we've got the safeguards in place that will protect the school. I know you can't always make everyone happy, but we can sure try to balance things out to make it a win-win wherever we can. And I would like to think that would be the direction we would go if we went that direction. We have a lot of research to do on how this would work.
Sewer and road development, I mean, that is definitely benefiting the school. I mean, but then if that assessed value, then and this redevelopment commission sitting here, we've got all this extra money to spend, and then we're spending it unwisely, and we're just going, well, let's just build a park for the sake of building a park, when that's not what is needed.
And I think that's where the plan's important.
Yeah.
And having in that first public hearing, and having the plan and everyone to be able to put input into it. And that's where and you're right, where it's really important to make sure that, that's great, you bring 200 new kids, but if you don't have a place to put them, that creates a problem. And the other thing to remember too is to help the budgets and stuff, that there would be additional income taxes, so local income taxes would go up. It's hard to say offhand if it's enough, but it's something that would be there.
So at the end of the 20-year period, what happens then? Does everything expire and then all the property
Yep.
taxes are going back to the general
The
pool?
assessed value is released back to.
What about leftover money in the commission from that?
That would stay with the commission. Now, you can do with it as you please, if you want to use it for improvements at a school or so forth, you can decide to do with it, but you really should be spending the money as you're receiving it, or you should be passing off the AV. You shouldn't be over collecting it anyways.
Bill, I see your hand back there.
I keep hearing the phraseology, we'll protect the school. I want you to protect the taxpayers.
Well, that would be a consideration as well.
We're
Yeah.
missing, no, because there's additional fire coverage, different police, there's a whole series of things that will be affected by that increase, and the money's not gonna be there. And, we have things that are TIF that I think, why we TIF this? Some of our commercial TIFs, I just think, 2 or 3 of them I know of, I don't understand why and why they've been renewed. So many people I'm hired, they're hiring relatives. That's not real jobs. And we're just on a TIF craze right now that we need to stop and say, wait a minute. And like I say, these tax bills, they're not going down.
Right.
I have a question for Derek. We're talking about the schools are holding population. Do you know what the percentage of that capacity is of McCormick's Creek? Are we 80%? Are we 50%?
I asked that this summer, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head.
We need to know that.
Yeah.
If you put another 100 kids in that school,
Yeah.
without any expansion?
I guess that was kind of my question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of empty rooms out there, but.
Yeah.
I'm just asking questions.
From our perspective, reading the development in the county of housing being built, and when we see that, we know that likely the impact of the increase in students that's not going to happen overnight. That doesn't. But as you build more homes, more people move in. They have kids. They 5 years later are then students at our elementary school. Looking ahead, if I look at the numbers now, this county could lose 10,000 people tomorrow. Who knows? But if I look at what's happening now, our enrollment numbers are steady. They declined there from 2017 to 2021, and they've held steady since. With the increase in development, that tells me numbers probably will at least hold steady, or if not, increase, especially in the area that the development is. Little old Patricksburg, I doubt we see a lot of development and increase in Patricksburg, Indiana. But McCormick Creek Elementary School, reading what's happening in the community today, I would say that we will need to, 15 years down the road, 10, 15 years, have a conversation about, is this facility keeping up with the population of that area? So, or we couldn't, who knows?
Well, we can safely say this is just an educational step. When you hear about the process, this is something that you have to run through your county council, your commissioners. Everyone really needs to be on board before anything like this even moves forward. So I think it's good educationally for us to kind of learn about this tool. How might it work for Owen County, and then just kind of go from there. We appreciate you being here today.
Of course,
So you could give us a 2-page summary maybe of the key points, maybe you can
And
get
I
to us.
was gonna have a handout for everybody. Marcy called me, I think it was last Wednesday, and then Thursday I caught the flu, and I wasn't back in the office until Monday afternoon, so I just didn't have a chance.
It's all right.
But I will get something sent out to you guys. I have there's some really good information from Barnes and Thornwood too.
Okay.
They have, it's called the Both on Redevelopment, and it has a lot of good information in there too. So I can send that to Marcy, And then, would that be good, so she could send it to you?
Anything that's like an executive summary,
Yep.
kind of,
Yep.
if you want us to read it, it better be an executive summary.
I will send,
I'll be
give
honest.
everybody like hard.
We got a lot of stuff to keep up with. But thank you for being here today. It's a good, I enjoy being able to look at that.
I'll take another one. I was going to say on residential TIF, I know that the town of Spencer worked on one for the Cook addition when they annexed that piece of property. You know, there are some benefits to TIFing, both for the developer and for the town at large, or even the county at large. But I'm just speaking from my experience. But, you know, we've seen an increase in a population of 200 as of this year. I don't know exactly when that timeline was done, well, as far as that somewhat short census was done. But even if a third of those individuals are children in our school district, you know, you're looking at 70 to 80 people in our schools, and most of those are in Spencer Elementary. So I see the benefit of developing areas that are relatively low taxed, because then with that development, you see an increase in tax later, but it's a trade-off to a certain extent. But I do understand your concerns, and that is very, very viable concerns.
And to Bill's point, something I'd like this commission to consider is doing residential TIF with this section, this area. Should it be done? I mean, you know, to what Hunter said, I mean, does it have a net benefit, or does it hurt things in the long run? I mean, that's a good conversation to have. A lot of there's been an increase, as you mentioned, there's been relaxing of some of the requirements and the sign-offs and all that. And so areas are just saying, yeah, well, let's go do it, without the forethought of, well, should we do it? Is this going to help? Just because we can do it doesn't mean that it's going to actually benefit the taxpayers and provide a good mechanism. I mean, from the road perspective and the sewer perspective, I think, yeah, that makes sense. For the school's perspective, the safety of, I mean, if that road goes through, that makes for a safer bus route for everybody. For travelers on the road, the bus drivers, for the kids. So I'm in favor of seeing a solution to that problem, but hopefully we don't create more problems along the way.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear from the land developers that are here. Guys, did you have, either of you, John, or did you have anything to share and what's on your mind about that when you think about residential TIF?
I really had no knowledge of it, I was just here to kind of
Soak it in?
see what it was. When
Okay.
you talk TIF, is it like we're taking all those tax dollars, or do you sit up and say, we're only gonna take 20% of those, we're only, what does that?
Generally, it's increase in assessed value in that area for qualified property, which would be residential development, from the point that you start the TIF. So you're not gonna see any additional dollars until you see appreciated value increase in property taxes. That gets more or less funneled into the zone.
From like the houses? we
Yes,
sell?
it'd be from the houses that you're building.
So if they go in there and they say, your tax is $6,000 a year, the TIF takes all $6,000 from each individual home, they take a percentage of it, how does that,
It would be
how does that work?
so wherever
In layman's terms.
when that fence gets put around, when the TIF district gets created, the assessed value at that time, that would remain what the county and all the taxing districts would receive. We would receive, based on a vacant lot, whatever the tax value is, we would get, schools, the county, everybody would get that value. The increase to that assessed value, so now you have a home on it, that's a big increase in assessed value of that piece of property. That increase
All that money.
would be captured by the redevelopment commission to be used.
And it has to be 20 years.
Yeah, actually, does it have to be 20 years?
Currently statute is, it's either, there's no length currently if there's no bond issue. It's 20 years from the first bond issuance. So the first time you leverage that revenue.
Yeah.
But then can a county vote to kill a TIF
Yeah,
later on?
anytime. Yeah.
So the county says, well, we've done what we needed to do, we're done with
I guess
it.
that's my question.
There's nothing that doesn't say you could create a TIF and say, we only want it for 10 years or 15 years. I mean, you could adopt it with a lifespan. That's just the lifespan that statute says you can do.
Okay.
I guess that's my question.
That's a good
We're
question.
talking road and sewer, why would we TIF it for 20 years if that can be done in 2, then you just TIF it for a few years?
Yeah.
Right.
Get the
Yeah.
structure that you need in there, and then that money is turned back over rather quickly, then I understand why he's concerned about it.
Yeah. In schools across the state, that's an issue that they're faced with is redevelopment commissions are going, oh, we can get it for 20, let's do it for 20. But then the school's sitting here going, well, but now we have more students. In that 20 years, that's a long time in a life cycle of student populations. And
That doesn't even make sense to me.
Yeah.
As a citizen.
and schools go, well, we saw this big increase in students, but we're still, and then 20 years later, we won't get that taxed dollar, that is increase in assessed value for 20 years. That's a long time.
I guess that's what would interest me in it. If we're talking a road and we're talking about sewer, then I wouldn't see a point in it.
But then I'm hearing you can set the TIF up to have some safety valves where money could be released for the school from that as part of the plan.
Yeah.
So,
Well, at that point, at that point, you could basically reevaluate annually just to see where you're at as far as where your debts are, where your future projects are, if there are any required for additional infrastructure such as sewer expansion to the school, roadways, that kind of thing. And if it comes to a point where it's like, 10 years down the road, we've done everything that we want to do, you can go ahead and say, hey, redevelopment commission recommends that we, suspend or dissolve this TIF district as it's currently set. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also possible that 20 years, there's very little redevelopment and there's very little growth to the assessed value. I mean, that's a possibility as well, that we do it and it doesn't really get us that far. That's also a possibility,
we
so.
lose anything.
I mean, housing crisis or housing, the bottom drops out of the housing market and there isn't development, so that's a possibility as well, but hopefully not for you. For your sake, I'm hoping not.
I guess the way I look at these kind of tools is, I've always looked at Owen County redevelopment as the place where your economic development hits the road with your county government. And we have to be in tune with our commissioners and our county councilor, which represents our taxpayers, when we make decisions like this, where if we do this right, you set it up with some flexibility to handle these kind of situations where we are trying for the win-win as best as we can. Because the idea of development in an area, helping to pay for it, the sewer and the improvements that you needed anyway, is very attractive. It just makes sense. But then, are you covering all these other safeguards that you have to consider for the school? I think that's always our nut to crack, So I think this is a great start for this process of learning more about this. We're going to have a lot of questions that need to be answered. We're certainly not going to move forward too quickly. But these are the tools we need to consider if we want to make these kind of things happen in Owen County in a fiscally responsive manner. So that's what I love about the representation we have on this commission. Hopefully we can just do the job right, and maybe we'll decide it's a tool we want to use, maybe it won't fit. So time will tell.
Now, I will say I'm a fan of TIFs to a certain extent, but that's just my personal opinion. But I do see that we need to be in constant talks with all the affected parties, so that we're not harming them, we're not putting an undue burden on our police, our fire, our EMS, any of our major services that are not seeing an increase in their revenue while also seeing an increase in their own services provided. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
And also, so the Town Redevelopment Commission with the residential TIF with the Cook property, the increase in assessed value, I mean, the potential earnings of that TIF district is not great. It's, I mean, it's not like $100 million is going to come in tax dollars and we're going to build Taj Mahal of infrastructure because of that TIF district. So there does have to be some realistic expectations about the earning potential of a TIF district. It's not a guarantee that you're going to go, oh yeah, we're going to build the best road in the county with this TIF district. That may not occur, so.
You're right.
Now, I have a question. You said that there was 200 people population increase because of that project,
And they're only at a third capacity right now.
but have we determined, are those 200 people outside the county, or are those people that have left the county and come to town? I think that's important to know. Are we having population growth, or are we having people move from one area of the county, one township to another?
You know, that's a good question, and I
So
don't
we
know
can't
the,
answer that.
I don't know the exact
No, I
answer.
can speak to that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was actually why I raised my hand. Because if you aren't, you know, I understand what Bill is saying, and we always need to be concerned about our taxpayer, but since 2010, Owen County has been on a population decline and has an aging population up until last year. For the first time last year, not only did we plateau, but we increased by 219 people in Owen County. And that's a big deal for our small community. A majority of those individuals that are in the Cook workforce housing have come from outside the county. So we are attracting population to the community. And so that would be something to consider. In the comprehensive plan, we have stated that this is, you know, up by 43, that's that area of growth. Yes, I know it would be capturing funds and, you know, obviously, everybody here wants to do their very best for the community, but in the long run, that would be a way to increase that population, and that way you have the burden of paying taxes spread across a larger population instead of a declining population.
I'll argue with the decline. The problem is with the Census Bureau. Inside Owen County, you can have a Bloomington address. You can have a Worthington address. You can have a Bowling Green address. You can have a Cloverdale. And they're not picking up our population. And, you know, you can have a Paragon address. And the Census Bureau is not cutting those out by
County.
where the people live. I mean, if you just sit and think, addresses is just unbelievable. Bowling Green, Worthington, all the way around, even it's amazing, Bloomington addresses at the end of Franklin Road. Those houses have Bloomington addresses. You know,
And Bloomington's got Spencer addresses.
yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
It's back and forth.
Yeah.
Census is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the general-
Census is wrong.
The general goal still remains, we want to do what we can to attract people to Owen County, and the dollars will follow. Well, I think we need to wrap up the meeting. I appreciate this conversation. Did anyone have any final thoughts to add as we conclude? I think the next topic is setting another meeting. Do we need to wait? And I'd like to give Tony the time to acclimate to some of these issues and things before we set another meeting, so when we have another meeting, we're ready to do whatever the next steps are in things, rather than just have a meeting. So I'm not so sure we can set that date today. We've already set in place a way to renew our environmental study, so we're gonna be fine there. I can't think of any other pending business that we'll have to worry about for a little while. I think we would like to meet again in February sometime. I just feel like we're premature in setting the date unless we want to try for a date later in the month.
Why don't you wait till you get your environmental study back and then set a date at that
I like
time?
that. I want to just make sure we're progressing at the right speed and Tony's comfortable and we're ready to do the next steps at the appropriate time. So our next meeting is a TBA, it'll be announced, and whether we end up having a public meeting out of necessity, we'll consider that as well. We'll make sure we have the appropriate notice. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Sheila's got one more item.
If council, I don't remember if the commissioners did they officially reappoint you to RDC? And
Sam
then-
called me on the phone and asked me if I wanted to stay here, and I told him yes.
Okay, so.
Welcome back.
Do we need to note that in the appointment and the swearing-ins and all of that? Do we need to amend that motion pending council?
I would suggest we go ahead and do that, just to fix it now, so that
Okay.
there's no question about it.
How does that motion need to be worded? Or is it
You could just make a motion to amend to add that point.
Okay, I can't make motions, so we need someone to make that motion.
I'll make the motion.
Do you have a second?
I'll second
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
If there's no further business, we have a motion to close the meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.